Jacksonville. The child was born but couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks and their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talked for hours. It was a barefoot history in this land of flowers.
On April the 20th, 2019, the week that was, from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. We have an interesting production lined up here. We'll hear from Uncle Carl Rove, as we normally do. He's writing in the Wall Street Journal. We also have Amy Walter with the Cook Report. We have the latest Reuters poll out on the popularity of DJ Trump. And we have a sad story, which you'll hear from her, Laura McKee, a journalist, 29 years old, I believe, in Northern Ireland. She was killed by a stray bullet in Londonderry. There was a rebellion going on at the time there, and she died too young, no doubt about that. The authorities there in Londonderry, Northern Ireland, have two teenage suspects in custody. When our production is finished, you'll hear a TED Talk she did, and she was talking about various things. She was in the LGBT community and how it impacted her life. And when she toured the U.S. On gun violence, she went to the tour, speak to various people, including she heard DJ Trump, the National Rifle Association. She went to Disneyland and various other places that they entice people so they'll go on these tours. Nonetheless, she had a tour, and she had a moment at a TED Talk, not the national one, but a regional one, or a Pacific topic one. Let me get it straight here. Anyway, nonetheless, that is part of it. Let me just look at the lineup here, and of course, we'll have sport. And we'll start off here, I suppose, with Uncle Carl Rove himself. He's writing on the 18th of February in the Wall Street Journal. The title of his article, Bernie Could Win This Time. Well, yeah. No doubt, despite any suggestion to the contrary, Senator Bernie Sanders, televised Fox News Town Hall, we did a special on it, on a Monday, did not come out as a bizarro world. In fact, it was evident our politics is not as broken as many people think. Ignoring the decree from Posthumous Democratic chair Tom Perez, that Fox News would not host any Democratic presidential debate. It is not so suited in a not so subtle signal to candidates to stay off the network entirely. Bernie wade into the hour-long conversation with Fox News anchors Brett Barr and Martha McCollum before an audience in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, former steel town, a good place for Bernie to be. The Prenonius, Vermont socialist was rewarded with around 2.6 million viewers, nearly twice as many as the February CNN town hall drew, making his appearance in the most watched election event so far in this cycle. Viewers saw Mr. Sanders' strengths and flaws. The senator demonstrated that he is a serious contender with or an upside, but glaring weaknesses that opponents can exploit. Sanders' sure-footedness was a reminder that his 2016 run against Hillary the Monster Clinton made him a better candidate. It always does, because you have the experience of running a race. On Monday, Bernie was fluid, pairing questions about how much money President Trump's tax cuts saved him on the $500,000 his household raked in last year by simply saying, "I paid taxes that I owed." Sanders then pivoted, demanding that DJ Trump join him in releasing 10 years of tax returns. When Ms. McCollum used South Bend, Indiana Mayor Buttigieg call for new generation leadership, they asked Sanders, who will be 79 on election day, is too old to be president. He kept following me around the campaign trail. He then acknowledged that it was a fair question and a very smart way of doing it, before taunting his health and bending the conversation back to, it's not whether you are young, it's not whether you are old, it's what you believe in. And Bernie is correct there. The senator from Vermont distinguished himself by focusing on his vision, not simply bashing the president. If we spend all our time attacking DJ Trump, I'm using DJ, he said Trump, he said that Democrats are going to lose. Perhaps most importantly, Bernie's 2016 experience seemed to have taught him how to smooth socialism's rough edges. Democratic socialism, to me, he told the crowd, is creating a government and an economy and a society which works for all, not only the top 1% in a wealthy democratic civil society like our own. People are entitled to certain basic rights, and that is where many of us progressives differ from conservatives and middle-of-the-roaders and what have you. That healthcare, for instance, is a right, education is a right, and I'll get to that in a minute. But such platitudes go only so far in mastering what drives Sanders' philosophy, resentment, grievance, and a desire to take from those who have redistributed the wealth, and redistribute the wealth, all to expand the government. He describes socialism in benign terms, but he regularly drops his guard, opening himself up to devastating counter-punches. For example, the senator said that Medicare is a government-run program, but also claimed that we are not talking about government-run health care. Now, there is a difference right there. When we speak, and we did in the 70s, of national health care, we were not only talking about insurance. Actually, that was a And part of the argument, we were talking about nationalizing the entire medical system. You would have U.S. medical centers, U.S. medical clinics, etc. And of course, again, once you do that, you would have a single payer to it. That's what Bernie is saying. Let me just help Bernie out a little bit here. And go on here. Complaints about abolishing private health insurance to nearly 177 million Americans by suggesting that a lot of people lose their insurance under the current system. He's correct about that. When they get fired, or when they quit, or when they go to another employer, a boss. Now all of us can be so lucky. That is exactly true then. When you leave your network, you are penalized for that. That's one of the big problems with managed care. Bernie also made the mistake of arguing about whether credit is due to DJ Trump for growing the economy. Strong wage growth. Well, the wage growth out there has been moderate. Low unemployment claims. They result from global trends. Bernie's next time to change the subject. Better next time to change the subject. Anyway, he was often light on vital details. In one instance, Bernie dodged attempts to pin him down on his agenda's course. We pay for what we are proposing, without mentoring any numbers. Call it Bernie's magic asterisk. Well, here's a situation. What candidates propose in campaigns, and let's just divide this up while we're on the subject. If you're in a party primary, as Bernie is right now, the platforms or your talking points, or whatever you want to call it, promises, will change when you get in the general election because they are redefined. Also, when you are elected, they go into the legislative process. Now, the legislative process is obviously deliberative at best. There's input from various representatives in the House, from the parties, from the committees. There are many, many layers involved there. And, of course, in the Senate. As the former leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, used to say, the devil is in the details, even after you pass the legislation. So when you put these brick walls up on Bernie, how much it's going to cost, Bernie can't accurately tell you. There's been various studies about what it will cost. The Congressional Budget Office has talked about it. What we can say as an economist, that basically what will happen is, will depend a lot on what the final bill is. And also on the front side, or in the beginning of any type of program, we saw that with Obamacare, it costs more. It will cost less this time because we've had Obamacare, which basically takes care of so-called primary medical concerns. In other words, checkups and the kinds of things that you need to do to see if one has hypertension, high blood pressure, diabetes, those kinds of things, basic inoculations, shots, and a follow-through if needed for specialists. I can recall my own situation, having a PSA test, and the PSA test said I had a high level of on it, and then I had a biopsy, and then I was treated for prostate cancer. That was all under Obamacare at the time. So thus that opened up the door to have those things done. Otherwise, I would have been going to a neighborhood clinic, and they probably would have been done also. But that is one gateway, a segue in. And after the treatment, the healthcare cost was expensive, no doubt about that, because they did radiation. And then the radiation caused damage, and they had to do something called hyperbaric treatment, which you're in a hyperbaric chamber. You're sitting in there. You're not in some sort of enclosed capsule. But that cost thousands of dollars. And once that was over, the healthcare costs dropped. So did the radiation. To manageable levels of healthcare costs. But that's just an example from my personal example that the medical care cost level went down from thousands of dollars a year to basically the costs of routine examinations, blood examinations, so forth and so on. Just several $100s for the entire year, plus medications on the sideline also. Now, I do take a diabetic drug that is in itself very expensive. I do not take insulin, and the other diabetic pills, the same ones that our late great partner Jerry Pippin took, are minimal. But insulin is very, very expensive. There's no doubt about that. So thus we have just a real life example of where things could go. So you would have more costs on the upside. And generally, depending on what the results of these preliminary tests are, the cost would go down once the diagnosis is made. There's no diagnosis, good. And people would live healthier lives because hopefully they would get advice on what to eat. There's more of that publicly available now. And the government's even made available now for people that get food subsistence payments electronically. They can now order from Walmart, and I believe Walmart, Amazon, and get that. They used to say that they had to buy those items in person. That's no longer out there. Thus, they could get a bargain. They need to amend that and make sure that people can get healthier food, organic food, vegetables, etc., at prices that they can afford. And extra funds need to be added for that. So there's a lot of things to tinker with this. And we invite you to the episode we did on Bernie, where we evaluated Bernie. Yes, I agree with Uncle Carl. Bernie did a much better job in his segues, in his rebuttals, as he could. And he won over the Fox audience. The first person to ask a question was the head of a college Republicans chapter. But as far as the issue of age, well, Bernie's age is Bernie. DJ Trump is 72. He'll be 73 this year. He'll be 74 on November of 2020. So he moves on also with his age there. So we do have the age situation. The little pencil neck from South Bend, Budajan, said, well, this is passing on the baton. I noticed he's playing up his military service, but the situation there was he was in the Naval Reserve, and he was one of these not 90-day wonders. I think he was on active duty for a few months. He was an intelligence officer. A little different kind of mental there for him to take. And he's also an opportunist. He has his own problems. But back to the various Democrats and Fox News. Amy Klobuchar from the Midwest will be on a Fox Town. We'll have a Fox Town meeting in May. And she's appealing to a working class audience also. It's a good place for her to go because the working class, many of them, watch Fox News, and they'll understand her priorities, platforms, and ideas. In fact, she had an idea on elections, and it was co-sponsored with Lanford. Lanford is a conservative Republican from Oklahoma. On the House side of it, he's on the Senate side, I guess. Anyway, this in the Senate, it died because leader McConnell, old man McConnell, would not bring it up. But it would have provided for reform in the electoral process. And that is the issue. And for Democrats, whomever, progressives, you need to talk issue. Now, I'm not a policy wog, But the whole point is you need to let people know where you stand in terms of policies. And you also need to inform people that if you have a talking point or a policy, if elected, that would not be the final word. That's why we have a legislative process and a judicial process that much. So that's being honest with people. You're going to see a lot more honesty there as we rake away, take away the debris, the bushes, and we can see the tree. Literally, the whole forest, not several little trees. So there is an indication, at least, that this campaign will be more expansive. Now, next week, Joe Lunchbox Biden evidently has a video. He'll talk about growing up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, which was the same area, same town where Hillary Clinton's relatives had come from, with solid working class roots. And has a video that just shows you that Lunchbox is ready for quote unquote the new media, social media, and he'll put that out, and then he'll get out with the people. He was at a shop and stop in Boston. Shop and stop, the workers are on strike against the bosses at Shop and Stop, which is a retail, a grocery outlet in Boston, in New England. So we have a New England connection there, and you'll see all these candidates start to spread out. Beto O'Rourke was roaming through. I believe he was in Charlotte. He was in South Carolina. He was in Greenville. That's Jesse Jackson's hometown. So he's all over the place. Many of these candidates are out roaming around. Bernie was out roaming around, and all of them will be out over this Easter weekend, roaming around the countryside and some perhaps the urban side. But they have to get the message out. Bernie has 1.5 people enlisted in his campaign. He needs at least 1 million more and up the fundraising machine. And the whole idea is to have a grassroots organization in all 50 states and in every community possible, whether it be a small community, a larger community, a county level, and a state level, not just in a state, say for instance like Iowa and New Hampshire. Yes, those you get you on your trip, but once you get through Iowa, go to New Hampshire, then on over to Nevada, suppose play a slot, maybe win something, and then you go to South Carolina. And then you're getting into what they call Super Tuesday. That would be in March, and the big ball game where a lot of states are going to be there, California, Texas, for example. And then once you get through March, you have April. You used to be looking around for June when Robert Kennedy was killed at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, which is no longer there. But now it's a totally different regimen. Let me move on here. Rage too long here. We'll get this poll last. We'll go now to Amy Water. Are all living in it? Some early polling shows that Bernie Sanders, VP Lunch by Joe Lunchbox Biden, as the front runner for the 2020 Democratic nomination. But early polling has been unreliable predictor of future success. If you haven't already, you should follow Washington Post's Twitter account, The Hold. That is, I believe, from the many of those leads at this point in previous elections didn't end up the leaders didn't end up the party nominee. There's no doubt about this. This is where Sanders has dominated. The important at this stage of the game is the ability to set terms and, in other words, and the terrain of the game. This is where Sanders is dominant. The Vermont senator has set the rules, both written and unwritten, and has forced the rest of the field to follow him. The political terrain. On the eve of the Iowa caucuses in 2016, Hillary Clinton attacked Sanders' push for Medicare for all as unrealistic. She ran an ad in which she argued that Americans can't afford to wait for a plan that looks good on paper but will never make it in the real world. Today, Medicare for All has become the default position of almost every candidate in the race. Within the 2020 candidates have wildly differed on approaches and embraced Medicare for All as an issue is animating and dominating the 2020 primary debate. That is exactly how Sanders would like to be. That, however, is not where a lot of Democrats would like to see the focus of attention, especially those who worry that a debate over socialized medicine will be a political disaster for the party in 2020. The rules of the DNC before the 2020 cycle, presidential candidates would spend serious time and energy corralling the support of elected party leaders known as superdelegates. These party leaders, the insiders, who typically make up about 15 or 20% of the total delegates in the Democratic Convention, were free to support any candidate of their choosing. Many of these superdelegates announced their support for the monster long before the primaries got underway. It was a signal to the party faithful that the candidate they were supporting should be taken serious and was viable. While superdelegates can theoretically throw their weight and the nomination behind a candidate who did not win the most pledged delegates in the primary, that has never happened. Even so, during and after the 2016 campaign, Sanders' campaign and his backers attacked the nominating process as opaque and tilted to the favor of the establishment to help resolve faith in the DNC. The organization last year agreed to reduce the influence of these superdelegates. Didn't get rid of them. The new rules dictate that superdelegates are barred from voting on the first ballot to choose the party's presidential nominee unless a candidate has secured a majority of the convention using only pledged delegates. Those votes are earned during the primary process. How does this help Bernie? Well, it means that the establishment candidate, i.e. the anti-Bernie candidate, wouldn't be able to build up early pre-primary leads amongst superdelegates, which can impact not only the number of delegates a candidate can claim, but can also impact the perception of electability and viability. Boris Hersink of the Washington Post says, this is the Monkey Cage blog, wrote last September, superdelegates have played an important role in the so-called invisible primary process that takes place before any voters hit the polls. In 2020, Clinton already had several hundred superdelegates backing her long before the first primary voter cast a ballot. Opponents of the old system argued that this affected voters' behavior. Since the media reported on candidate delegate totals, including the superdelegates, voters could have overestimated the candidate's popularity. Political scientist Larry Bartell, and I invite you to read a classic study of presidential primary voting behavior, suggests that voters do consider a candidate's likelihood of winning the nomination, which means the superdelegates' support could theoretically affect primary voting. Moreover, Sanders and his allies have been effective in painting these delegates as subversive. That serves to lessen their influence even on the second ballot at a contested convention. In other words, if Sanders comes into the convention with the most pledged delegates, the superdelegates' ability to coalesce and deny him the nomination will be seen as illegitimate. Not long ago, presidential candidates like to boast about fundraising prowess. They hyped their support from wealthy bundlers who would raise tons of cash from their friends and colleagues, Wall Street in other words. They didn't shy away from raising money from those who worked on Wall Street, Silicon Valley, but no longer socially acceptable in the Democratic primary. Candidates are now held to the Bernie small dollar donation standards. As a recent Politico deep dive into Democrats' first quarter fundraising noted, fundraising amongst Democrat candidates for president has been muffled so far this year, as many Democrats try to prove their distance from a special interest in wealthy donors. Well, that's a lot of them were bad at that. Report found that Kamala Harris had received the most donations from the Obama-Clinton bundles in the first quarter, but almost 4 in 5 of the Obama-Clinton fundraisers have yet to give any specific donations. They are holding their breath. This hesitancy from dollar donors to commit to a candidate is also a huge boost to Bernie, who Politico notes drew the least support from the Clinton-Obama types. Now, articles like this set up the position that the Obama-Clinton people don't like Bernie. A breakdown of the first quarter fundraising total by a Congressional Finance Institute found that Sanders raised 84% of his $18 million with donors who gave less than $200, and Elizabeth Warren 70%, but she raised a third, $6.1 million. Kamala Harris just got 37% of her $12 million hauled from low dollar voters. Having a huge number of small donors that gives a candidate more growing room in fundraising. You can go back to those donors again and again, and they are donating to your candidacy, not spending out the $150 across 3 or 4 of them. Whether it's focus on the low dollars, the reticence of big money folks to jump feet first into a candidate, or the combination of both. The total first quarter fundraising in 2019 is decidedly lower than it was in 2017, the first time Democrats had a highly competitive process. This quarter, 2019, Democrats raised roughly $75.3 million, impressive, but not as large as $83.2 raised by Democrats in the first quarter of 2007. And that's not 2000. We now measure dollars in 2008. You put those 2007 dollars into equivalent, as the Congressional Finance Institute did, the 2007 Democrats would have outraised 2019 by $15 million. We're too early in the game to start throwing around terms like favored in this wide open primary amongst Democrats, but Bernie Sanders has succeeded in very important aspects of the game. Thus far, he's been able to dictate the rules and the terrain. Well, no doubt about that. The question going forward for me, can anyone beat him at his own game? Well, this is a mistake a lot of candidates make, is not running their own campaign, is trying to mimic or copycat other candidates to try to bamboozle their supporters or bamboozle the media, and the corporate media then tries to spin it for that particular candidate, as they're trying to do for the pencil neck from South Bend. Can anyone, and R2, can anyone else rewrite those rules? Well, a little late for rule writing at this juncture of the game. Let me quickly get what old Sarah Sanders has been up to. This is an AP article. It goes on the offensive, defending a credibility after report. The press secretary, Sarah Sanders, tried to do damage control for her own credibility Friday, insisting that she had intentionally misled the American public about Director James Comey's firing, despite telling the special counsel that her claim that counsel's agents had lost confidence in him was not founded. Now, the other person that brought that out was the old defense attorney there, Giuliani. Sanders, who told special counsel Mueller that her comments during a White House press briefing that was in May of 2017 had been a slip of the tongue made in the heat of the moment, claiming a series of television interviews that the sentiment behind her words that many rank-and-file FBI agents had lost confidence in Comey and contacted the White House to say so was a lie. He said remain untrue. They're diplomatic. If you look at what I said, the slip of a tongue was using the words countless, but a number of FBI agents, both former and current, that's the same thing there, that agree with the president's decision, and they continue to speak out as former and say and send notices to the White House that the argument with the president's decision, she said on Good Morning America. I said that in the heat of the moment, meaning it wasn't scripted. That's a lie. Adding on the CBS this morning that the big takeaway here is that sentiment is 100% accurate. Stands amongst a score of other current and former White House officials who were interviewed by Bob Mueller's team during the nearly 2-year investigation of this campaign coordination with Russia. Mueller concluded his investigation last month. Attorney General Barr made some kind of report. The president told Comey at a dinner. They had a dinner together, and this is in that, and we'll be doing this. That was on the 27th of January. That people of the FBI, like him, no evidence suggests that the president heard otherwise before deciding to terminate Comey. Anyway, Sanders acknowledged to investigators that her comments were not founded on anything. The report said that she spoke to Mueller's investigators under oath. They told her the use of the word was a slip. She then told them a slip of the tongue because she couldn't lie there. They would get her. She'd be in jail. I'm sorry, but I wasn't a robot like the Democratic Party. She's doing a flippable there. Went out 2 years ago and started time and time again that a definitive collusion between the president and the Russian types there. She faced similar questions last year after Rudy Giuliani comes in this. One of DJ Trump's personal attorneys surprised the White House by saying on national TV that Trump had reimbursed his fixer, that is Cohen, for $130,000. Cohen paid a porn actress, Stormy Daniels. Now documented on the record on the Oath episode. I think it's completely obliterates her credibility. That is from Kyle Pope, the editor-in-chief and publisher of the Columbia Journalism Review. I remember watching and thinking that there was no countless FBI people calling up Sarah Sanders. Pope said that the episode raises questions about why any reporter would attend a Sanders briefing. Frank Sesno, remember Frank Sesno used to be at CNN, director of School of Media and Public Affairs at George Washington University, said credibility is the only currency a press secretary has to offer. When you're thrown overboard or devalued, you do so at your own peril. I think that Sarah Sanders has lots of explaining to do why she should have done, which she should have done straightforwardly and honestly about discrepancy between her comments. That is Mr. Sesno. He's a former Washington correspondent for CNN. Remember Frank? Anyway, he continued, the public and the media expect partisans and press secretaries to spin or attempt to spin a rosary face on less than flattering situations. They don't expect them to lie. If you get caught in a lie, you should acknowledge it and figure out whether you can repair your reputation, if you have a reputation to repair. So let me just check this, and we'll go and do sports here. Well, for the Miami Herald, let me just throw this in here. We'll just get the headline. Face it, Republicans, Alexandria-Ocasio-Cortez is way smarter than you guys. This is an opinion piece here by Leonard Pitts Jr. And I won't read it all. You might want to stop messing with AOC, memo to the Republican Party, a freshman Congress type with no significant legislative achievements. So it makes little sense that you spend so much time and energy on her. You'd think you learned yet, like Charlie Brown trying to kick the football. you keep coming back for more. Yeah, that was the ill-fated thing in Kentucky. They invited her to go and look at a mine. Well, she was going to show up there, and all the cameras would be on AOC, period. Not to treat her like the second coming, as she is again just a neophyte lawmaker, but in her passion, her preparedness, and her pugnacity, AOC is conducting a master's class on the power of light and air, using notoriety you gave her to do so. A new generation of progressive leaders is seriously taking note. So, a smart party would up their game, would quit manufacturing demons and start manufacturing ideas. Well, no ideas to manufacture. Smart manufacturing hope. It would be nice to believe that that's what you do. And on the other hand, Charlie Brown always said he wasn't going to let Lucky trick him again. It would be nice to believe that too. Well, they have been tricked again and again and again and again. Let's do the sports now. From the National Basketball League, they're in a little playoff operation too. The Raptors won 98 to 93 over the Magic. The Celtics beat the Pacers 104 to 96. And finally, the Thunder came out 120 to 108 for the Portland Trail Blazers. On to Major League Baseball. We took in a few games on Friday. The Cubs 5-1 over the D-backs in Wrigley Field. The Yankees 6-2 over the Royals in New York. The Pirates 4-1 over the Giants in Pittsburgh. The Red Sox 6-4 over the Rays in Florida. The White Sox 7-3 over the Tigers. The Marlins finally win a game 3-2 over the Nationals. The Astros keep their winning ways going 7-2 over the Rangers. And the Dodgers 5-3 over the Brewers in Milwaukee. The Mets, another game we tuned into, the last of it, 5-4 over our Cardinals. The Lions scored 11 hits and 2 errors for the Mets, and 10 hits and 2 errors for the Cardinals. Yeah, but the Cardinals came up short. I guess they were hit short. And in 12, the Phillies and Rockies. Rockies finally pulled that game out 4-3. The Lions scored there. Phillies 11 hits, 1 error. And the Rockies 8 hits, no error. And they won the game by a run. The Mariners and Angels, another game we tuned into. Angels had an opportunity to win this one, but nonetheless they came up short 5-3. And Toronto and Oakland, it was all the Blue Jays 5-1 in Oakland. And in 11, the Reds 3-2 over the Padres down in San Diego. And rain got the Twins. I guess rain got them. Twins and Orioles is postponed, and also Atlanta and Cleveland. On to the series in the National Hockey League. The Maple Leafs 2-1 over our Bruins, and the Avalanche 5-1 over the Flames. And let's see, this was the Western Conference round 1, game 5 there, and in the East it was the round 1, game 3. And Maple Leafs lead the series 3-2 over the Bruins. Well, the Bruins had better come back or they'll be going home. This will do it for us. We'll go to the TED Talk by Lear McKee. Anyway, we'll do that, and we'll see you on the political side on Monday morning, the Monday Morning Quarterback. And we have Numbers Man. We'll be talking about, that's our macroeconomics program. We'll be talking about the Beige Book. That's from the various Federal Reserve districts, and we'll have some more numbers also from our friends at the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And we'll have the first part of our Mueller Report, Volume 1. That's the technical part. We'll be talking about security, cybersecurity, what's going on there, encryption. We'll be going into that. We're doing that with the open source report. which you will air there first, and then it'll come over to the political channel, Boston Red. Have a good weekend, everyone, and happy Easter there, happy Passover, and happy everything. Good day.
Story. Need to tell you 19 other stories first before they can get to the point. I'm one of those people. I want to tell you a story about a conversation I witnessed in a mosque which changed my life. But to tell you that story, I have to tell you another story first, and I've only got 12 minutes. And that story starts in late May, early June of this year. I got the opportunity to go on a trip to the United States with a delegation from around the UK. I was the only one from Northern Ireland. And we were going there to learn about American values. We were going to be travelling across Washington, Florida and Texas, meeting with everyone from guns rights lobbyists to religious leaders and LGBT groups. People who span the spectrum of American values. So the thing about these trips is that they offer you a number of perks. Right? They offer you carrots they can dangle in front of you whenever the going gets tough, when you're in the 100th meeting of the day with someone whose views you find absolutely reprehensible and you're really struggling to stay the course. So in our case, they took us to Disneyland, which I can confirm is definitely one of the happiest places on earth. I was in my element. Then they took us to NASA, which, as a Star Wars nerd, I have to say, competed in my heart for the title of happiest place on earth. Someone very helpfully pointed out to me, because I was posting selfies of myself at that time, running around Florida in vest tops, and someone very helpfully pointed out that I seem to have more vests than Rab C. Nesbitt. I know the theme of the conference is bridges. I felt like burning that one, to be quite frank. And then we got to go to this beautiful beachside resort called Cocoa Beach and sip cocktails on the beach. It was absolutely wonderful. And you're probably thinking, where do I sign up for this trip? This sounds amazing. It's a free jolly, which was what I thought it was when I looked at the itinerary. But I had to go through hell to get these perks. I realised that really that Disneyland and NASA, that these were all carrots they were dangling in front of us. Whenever I found myself less than 10 feet away from the chief orangutan of the White House, El Trump. People ask me, what's the hardest thing about standing 10 feet away from Donald Trump? I think it was seeing how badly his fake tan was applied. The next part of the trip, I did redeem my conscience when I got to Florida, I should say, and we met these lovely protesters who, in case you can't see, are holding a Stop Trump sign, and they were right up my alley. I thought they were fantastic. Our next visit was to a place called the National Rifle Association. These are the guns rights lobbyists who come out in the wake of every mass shooting and defend the right of Americans to bear arms. And for a number of people in the group, this was the most difficult part of the trip. They found it very difficult to sit there and listen and exchange views, which was what the whole trip was about. Excuse me. For me, though, the hardest part of the trip was when we got to Orlando and they told us we were going to be visiting a mosque. Now, you ask yourself, why would I find it hard to visit a mosque? Well, for those of you who don't have gaydar, I'm gay. And don't worry, you can laugh, it's okay. And I hated myself for much of my life because of what religion taught me about people like me. And when I stopped hating myself, I started hating religion. But I was intrigued by this mosque because it was in Orlando, and a year to the week that we were in Orlando, 49 people were slaughtered in a gay nightclub called Pulse. And this mosque had led the response to that tragedy and had condemned it. And I was intrigued by that. This was at a time when Christian churches in Orlando were refusing to bury some of the dead because they were gay. So to have a church come out or a mosque come out and condemn this was a big deal. One of the victims of Pulse that always stuck with me was Brenda Marquez McCool. She was a woman who was out with her gay son that night in Pulse supporting him. And when the gunman unleashed his bullets, she threw herself in front of her son. And he survived, but she didn't. So I decided that I would go into this mosque with an open mind. And I did, and we met with this lovely man called Bassem, who was one of the leaders in the mosque. And we talked about everything, and eventually Bassem and I had a conversation about LGBT rights and what Muslims think of gay people, and difficult, thorny subject, but we had a really pleasant conversation. But neither of us knew what was about to happen next. There was a young man on our trip, who I'll call Mahmood, a young Muslim man, and he was listening to the exchange between Bassem and I. And when we finished talking, he spoke up and he addressed Bassem. And he said, my best friend was gay, he was Muslim, and he committed suicide. And at this point, Mahmood burst into tears. And he said, I did everything I could to save him, but I couldn't. And he told us the story of how this young Muslim man couldn't live with being Muslim and being gay, and felt that the only option he had was to die by suicide. We were all crying in the mosque, I think, by that point, and we were all mourning for this young Muslim man that we'd never met, and now that we would never get the chance to meet. You know, when I left religious education at 16, I swore that I was done with religion and I was never going back to it, and I was never going to have another conversation that I couldn't help with another person of faith again. When I was in that mosque that day, and I was there to learn about American values, and I ended up getting schooled on my own culture by a Muslim, because what I realised was that I couldn't run away from religion anymore. Within the LGBT community, we have a saying that we tell people. We tell them, it gets better. And what I realised that day was that it gets better for some of us. It gets better for those of us who live long enough to see it get better. I realised that I couldn't run away from religion anymore, because religion shapes how LGBT people are treated in the world. It shapes the laws and how they treat LGBT people, which we can see from the lack of equal marriage in this country. And it shapes how we LGBT people feel about ourselves. The first lesson I learned about being gay was that it was evil and that I was going to hell for it. And I learned that from the Bible. There were times that I would cry in my bedroom as a teenager, bargaining with God, asking him not to send me to hell, because I was so convinced that I was going there. You know, this text, this Bible, I know for so many people it offers them hope and it offers them salvation. But for me, it offered a prison sentence. And I think it's the same for a lot of other LGBT young people. LGBT suicide rates are through the roof. This is the percentage of trans youth alone in the UK who have attempted suicide over the course of the last year, and before. We see these numbers play out in Northern Ireland locally, and we know this from Trans Youth Services, who say they see it play out among their young people. What do we do about this? I feel the only answer is to change religious teaching on homosexuality and LGBT issues. And I don't mean we berate Christians and shout at them, or berate Muslims and shout at them. We need to do the one thing that I didn't want to do when I left at school at 16. We need to have conversations, difficult conversations, and fight for the hearts and minds of those who oppose us. I've studied this, and when you ask people like Megan Phelps-Roper, who was a member of the Westboro Baptist Church, a hate group in America, when you ask people like this, when you ask former neo-Nazis, the most extreme people, when you ask them what changed your mind, what made you abandon your views, they'll tell you the same thing. It was a conversation. Someone who they were opposed to struck up a conversation, and they learned that that person was not who they thought they were, and they got to a point where they could no longer hold those views. People tell me this isn't going to happen. There is no way the churches will change their teaching, or the mosques will change their teachings. You're mad. And I would have agreed with them. But 6 weeks ago, I was out in a gay bar, not this one, with my friend, Jordan. He's from a Free Presbyterian DUP voting family in County Legendary. Avoid that Londonderry dairy thing, I hate that. And we were out there with his mum, who is a Scottish Free P who goes to church every Sunday. And she was out in this bar supporting her gay son, just like Brenda Marquez McCool was out in Pulse that night supporting her gay son. Don't tell me there's no hope, because for too many LGBT young people, that is the only thing they have that keeps them living. And by the way, that free Presbyterian mother went into work the next day and told everyone about this amazing thing she'd been to called a drag show. Now, if you had told me that I'd be sitting in a gay bar with one of Ian Paisley's disciples, drinking cocktails and watching a drag show, I'd have told you were mad. So, what can you do if you thought you were here to listen passively to me rant on? No, I've got a job for you all. If any of you are uncomfortable with the thought of someone like me, please come up to me after this event and talk to me. I won't bite your head off. I won't call you a homophobe. We'll just have a conversation, and I'll show you that I'm human, just like you. If you are comfortable with the thought of someone like me, have a conversation with someone who isn't, and try to change their mind, because you could be saving a life. Finally, I'd like to send a message to all LGBT young people who are currently struggling, especially those from faith backgrounds. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. This talk is in memory of the Pulse 49 and all LGBT people who've died by suicide. Thank you very much, folks.